Next, we have our business department is going to do a quick budget primer. It was on the annotated calendar for actually next meeting, but I think next meeting we're going to have several presentations. So I thought this would be earlier. This would be a little bit. So I'm sorry, Mr. Olson and Mrs. Quitter.
Thank you for inviting us back this year, I guess mostly at the urging of Mr. Shaughnessy. So we want to breeze through about a dozen slides and just offer some comments about the budget process. The budget is sort of a continuous process. We're always getting information, even now, that will affect next year's budget. So although it's although we talk about starting the budget process, in our view, in Beth's view, I'm sure, the budget process never really ends. So the list of goals here are very similar to the list of goals that we had for last year's budget. I imagine many school districts have similar goals in their budget process. Support student achievement being the first one, maintain programs. I don't know, perhaps I don't need to read them to you. They're fairly clear.
Some of us can't see.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Do you want me to read them then?
Yes, please.
Okay. Seek public input, communication with stakeholders, meet goals identified by the Board of Education and the superintendent, equitable pupil allocations, long-range fiscal stability, and of course, keeping within the tax levy limit, otherwise known by some as the tax cap. I don't know, do you want to have questions as we go this year, or should we just go through it and then? Okay.
Oh,
I'm ready to
okay,
turn
so,
it on.
oh, go ahead.
Well, so this is these are some highlights from that reflect this year's budget. First of all, the budget vote, 64.2% of voters approved the budget this year. The total general fund budget went up by about 3.3% to $161 million. Closer to 162, actually, if you're a mathematician. Revenues to support the budget, I'm sorry, Tom, went up by about a little over 5%, which included primarily a state aid increase of about 5%. The GEA restoration, which was large 2 years ago, smaller this year, will disappear for next year. So that will be gone. And then the levy, which of course is of interest to everyone, went up by 1.98%, which is what the voters approved, 1.9% increase. Our maximum allowable levy was 3.37%, which takes into account factors such as our building project and such. So $100 million, this is the first year that the tax levy in the Kingston City School District was over $100 million. You want to do the tax
Yeah.
levy? Okay.
These are just a couple of highlights that I just wanted to mention that changes this year that have to do with the tax levy and the school tax bills. This year, there was a law for the tax freeze, the property tax freeze rebate. That was a 3-year program by the state in which the first year taxpayers received a rebate from the state, which represented the difference in their school tax bill from the prior year. So because the district was tax freeze compliant and developed a compliance and efficiency plan, we were able to enable our homeowners, star exempt homeowners in our district to receive that credit. The second year of the tax rebate program was homeowners receiving star got a rebate check in the amount that represented the change in their school tax, as well as a change in their municipal tax if the municipality was also tax-free. This is the last year, and the law has changed again. This year, the rebate will go only for the municipal change, but there are two new things. Actually, the next one's on the next page. So there's a couple of different things that changed this year with STAR. As of August of last year, new homeowners who apply for STAR will not get the STAR taken off their tax bill. So people who apply for STAR after August of last year, prior to that, you would apply for STAR with your assessor's office, and it would come off your tax bill, and every year you see that $650 or whatever, that amount goes up by 2% every year under the 2% tax cap law. And, that continues, and if you're STAR exempt enhanced, then you would apply because there's an income eligibility, and you would reapply every year, and we get that off our tax bill. So most taxpayers see the gross amount on their bill of the calculated tax levy amount, and then it's reduced by their STAR credit, essentially. So the net calculation is what their actual tax bill is. With the new law, these group of homeowners who purchased after August of last year will not get that credit on their tax bill. They won't get the $600 off their tax bill or $1,300 for STAR Enhanced. They're going to get a check from the state in the amount that they would have gotten if they had STAR. So it kind of complicated things this year for taxpayers. So you have some taxpayers who are getting it off their tax bill. So when they kind of compare their tax bills, there's some discrepancies. So it's just a matter of the law changing and communication on that. Two things that we are pleased to have presented this year, thanks to the board. Last year was the first year of the alternative veterans exemption, which enabled the district to offer savings to those who serve in specific conflicts. The first year, the savings that the veterans realized was about $700,000. This year, the calculation that we came up with was about $677,000. So those veterans received at least $200 to $300 off their school tax bill for having that exemption. And this was the first year that the board had supported and adopted a sliding scale senior exemption. Prior to this year, our senior exemption, aside from the STAR Enhanced, allowed 50% of an assessment reduction if your income limit was $20,000 or below. The board supported and approved a sliding scale, like many of the towns and municipalities and other school districts do, that enables a higher income level with lower reduced amount of percentages. So now we can offer 20 to 6% on senior exemptions off assessment to higher income levels. And quite frankly, we've had a lot of people that have come and have even come early because they think their bill was wrong because it was so much less, and they were just so happy. And not very often that taxpayers come up and say, "I want to kiss you." So when they say that, I'm very happy. So we're very excited about that. The amount that the value that was shifted, the value that it actually represented, wasn't able to isolate it totally, but it was about $220,000 more than the prior year. So last year's amount was just had the 50% less, and this incorporated the rest of the levels of the sliding scale. So that's a very positive. We've had a lot of positive results and reaction from our taxpayers who are very happy to receive this exemption. So thank you to the board and for supporting those. So this goes back to the tax-free rebate. This year, so this law, they've changed the law, and it's gotten a little complicated. But for the current year, instead of getting the tax rebate that we got last year, for this year only, if the district complied with the property tax cap, which we did, and the homeowner has a 2014 tax year income of $275,000 or less, and they are STAR eligible, they will receive, and it's outside of New York City, they will receive a check from the state for $185. Now this program has 3 more years, and the next 3 years have varying percentages of STAR as the rebate amount. So the state has made it a little complicated, but there's a schedule, and it's out on, all this information is out on the New York State Office of, it's actually New York State Tax Department under STAR information. So, and as I mentioned earlier, the 2016 property tax freeze credit was for the municipal bills. So just a little bit of different things happening, but people are either seeing tax relief on their bill from their exemptions that they currently have, from the expanded exemptions. And in addition to that, the state will be sending checks, rebate checks to help offset, either in the form of a star credit, which is for the new star owners, or a rebate credit, which is to help offset the your tax bill. When they come, I don't know.
That was all really complicated stuff. I hope that, you know, you were able to get something out of that. In any case, in the budget development process here, we have traditionally had budget forums, which will be scheduled, I think, probably shortly if they're not already scheduled.
Well, the first one is November 30th.
November 30th?
That'll be the first public forum for discussion for the 2017-2018 session.
Thank you. So November 30th, the first forum.
I think it's 30th.
Okay. That'll be right after Thanksgiving, I guess. And then, of course, in the office itself, we do a review and assessment of programs of all sorts, staffing levels, class sizes, building level requests, transportation and facilities, BOCES programs, and other contracted services. And then there's a number of costs that we generally have to consider fixed. We have salaries and contractual obligations. We have employee benefits, which include retirement and health insurance. And then we have, of course, debt service payments, which are on an upward trend right now due to the capital of the project. And then, of course, there's Board of Education input, review, and approval. The board must ultimately approve the budget.
I just want to say, our beginning point primarily is we start with the prior year's budget. And we just start by rolling it over to see where we are. I mean, that's going to be our baseline budget in any given year. A lot of the factors, especially for some of the fixed costs, we don't get that information until sometimes even after we have to have the budget to the state on March 1st or for board adoption in mid-April. Some of the state aid runs, the state aid numbers. We have our debt service payments are fixed. Some of our contractual obligations we know in advance if we have, those are out several years. Things like health insurance percentage increases, those types of things we don't really know when we're first in the development process. So the best we do is start where we are at the current year. We look at the last year's trends. We look at the last year's expenditures, see where we need to tweak things, see where there's additional needs or fewer needs that we can work around to try to, anticipate some of these other costs that we won't know that will have an impact when we get closer to really tweaking the bottom line of the budget and what the total cost is going to be.
So the current year's budget, as we described earlier, is the $161 million budget. I also mentioned that the school tax levy is in excess of $100 million. The other three components, which add up to the $161 million, from a revenue perspective, are state aid, which as you see is $56 million, about 35% of the budget. Other revenues, which include what?
Services, tuition payments from other school districts,
yes.
pilots, interest on taxes.
Those things.
Miscellaneous.
It's a small portion of the budget.
Scrap metal.
Scrap metal. And then the appropriated fund balance, which we take some of our fund balance, put into the budget, is $1 million in this case. So those are the sources, the revenue sources essentially that add up to balance the budget at $161 million. So this is the expense side, the appropriation side of the budget. This is how the money is spent. And for those who I'll just go around the disc here. Our labor costs, which include salaries and benefits, make up 75.5% of the budget. obviously an enormous amount. BOCES services at 6.5. We buy a lot of different things from BOCES, including IT work and IT services, special education services, many others. Equipment, supplies, and textbooks, about 1.5% of the budget. Tuition payments, which are tuition payments that we're making outside of our district, 4%. Contractual, another 4%. Debt service, another close to 4%. And that was 2% last year, by the way, the debt service. And then transportation, about 4.5%. So 3/4 of the budget is labor and benefits. So that's obviously the dominant part, that goes without saying, I suppose. Now, if you take that 75.5% of the budget, the labor and benefits, and just focus on that, this is how that portion is broken up. Salaries are 60% of that 75.5%. Retirement costs, which include FICA, which I would call retirement cost, are 12.5% approximately. Health insurance, 25, almost 26% of that 75.5% of labor and benefits is made up of health insurance costs. And then other employee benefits, which is a couple minor items, are under 1%. So that's the 75.5% of salaries and benefits, salaries, wages, benefits, how that breaks down.
And I just would like to point out, when we're talking about the retirement, we're talking about the New York State Teachers Retirement System and the New York State Employees Retirement System. So our annual contribution to the retirement systems are based on a statewide percentage. So every district is going to have the same percentage that they have to pay on their teacher salaries to the TRS and their employee salaries within the various tiers. But those percentage changes can really have a dramatic impact on your budget. As we learned the year that they went up to 17% and we had an automatic $2 million addition to our appropriations. We were fortunate in the last budget that the rate had actually gone down so that $2 million that we were able to save in that line item was absorbed within the rest of the budget and prevented the budget from going up higher. We don't know. Those rates usually aren't projected, again, until early in the year, in January. So again, we have a lot of unknowns that we have to work around. So, but at the current year rate is 11.343. It's 11 something percent. So, which is down from, but we don't know what it's going to be next year. It depends on the retirement system and the investments.
So for those of you who prefer numbers rather than percentages, the salaries and benefits represent over $120 million of the $161 million budget. And so the retirement piece that Beth is talking about, that little 12.6 slice, that's worth about $15 million all by itself. So retirement costs alone about $15 million. And obviously, since 12.6 is about half of the health insurance, you can quickly extrapolate that the health insurance costs for the district are on the order of $26 million, or is that right? Yeah. Double, more than double, probably a little higher than that. So these are big numbers.
Sure. These are just some of the things that are going to impact our budget going forward, and what our constraints are, and we discussed some of them a bit. We talked about fixed costs, projections, and our contractual obligations. Obviously, some of those are going to be known. They're going to be the first things that we're going to develop into the budget. We know what our debt service are going to be on the current bonds and bans that we have outstanding. We were hoping that, we're waiting on the state projections. We are done with gap elimination, so there's no question about how much of that we're going to get back, if we're going to get back any of that back. We don't know what the Foundation Aid formula funding by the state is going to be. In this past budget, there was an extra component for community schools. It sounded originally like it was going to be an additional piece of aid, but in the end, they backed it into your aid. So actually, our aid figure included this 200 and some odd $1,000 that we had to actually pull out from our aid and allocate that to specific initiatives. The other thing is the 2% tax cap, which obviously has an impact on where our budget, the total appropriations and the resulting tax levy. And that calculation, as we may know, and that we usually talk about at all of our budget forums, the 2% tax cap is not really a 2% tax cap. It's actually a calculation, usually comes out different for every single school district. We were fortunate last year in having a tax levy limit of 3.37%, whereas Saugerties was 0.12%. And different districts are different. And part of that is a result of the calculation and the factors that go into the calculation. So I just want to talk about a couple of factors that are in the calculation that will determine our maximum allowable tax levy growth for next year. The first factor is tax-based growth factor. That's specific to our district. The prior year, it was 0.46. That's less than 1%. The other factor is an allowable growth factor. This is this goes in everyone's, all districts calculation, and this is where the 2% comes from. This is the lesser of CPI or 2%. The CPI last year was pretty low.
It was about 2%.
The prior year allowable growth factor was 0.12%, which is pretty low. So basically, you're taking your tax levy and you're multiplying it by, I mean, the amount of additional dollars that we're able to levy through those two factors is very small. Because of the way that the formula runs, even though we did levy a tax levy that was below the maximum allowable, we do not have any carryover because the way the carryover is calculated, it's calculated on a prior to exemptions number. So we didn't have any carryover. We did that last year, and that contributed to our 3.37. We had available carryover from the prior year. Next year, we will not have available carryover. And the other factor that goes in there that allowed us to have a higher levy this year was your capital tax levy, which is the difference between your capital debt service, in other words, your debt service scheduled, all your bonds and bans payable, and your projected state building aid. Now, our building aid, that is going to be, that number there was bigger this year because our debt service payments are growing. And so next year, they went higher this year, so that number was bigger. So next year, we anticipate that percentage to be lower. So all in all, we're projecting early, and it's early to tell at this point, that our maximum allowable tax levy growth will be less than 2%, which is, and it's early, and we're hopeful, but we have to, understand that that might be our constraint for when we're developing this budget for next year. Another thing we wanted to discuss in conjunction with this, it's not really budget related, but it is budget related, is fund balance. And fund balance is actually a balance sheet item along with your assets and liabilities. And there's different types of fund balance. And the first type of fund balance is your unassigned fund balance, and that has been commonly known as the 4%. And we're allowed to retain 4% of our current year's budget as unassigned fund balance. We also have appropriated fund balance, and that appropriated fund balance is the amount we allocate to budget revenues. So at the end of last year, we appropriate $1 million towards the revenues for the next year, and that's called appropriated fund balance. It was money that was left over from last year, and we appropriated towards this year's budget to reduce the tax levy. And then it's also restricted fund balance. And restricted fund balance is fund balance that's held in legal reserves. And these different legal reserves, these are the reserves that are listed here are the reserves that the Kingston City School District has legally authorized these reserves, and we have funds in these separate reserve accounts. Tax Surcharge Reserve, the Capital Reserve, Employees Retirement System Reserve, Unemployment Reserve, Liability Reserve, and Property Loss Reserve. And what these reserves serve as they reduce your future liabilities in specific areas. Each reserve has specific laws that govern how they're established, how they're funded, how they're spent, and they all vary, what you can do with remaining balances. And there's, so, but the reserves that we have are all legal reserves.
So in particular, the tax certiorari reserve has been newsworthy recently because we have some developments in this area that have suffered economically, and they are appealing to the various assessment boards to have their assessments reduced, and it could even go back several years. So we will have to pay a fairly large amount of money out of that tax certiorari reserve to settle some of those issues.
And the important thing with that in conjunction with the budget is that if we didn't have a reserve, a legal reserve established from prior year's fund balance for these liabilities, we would have to come up with that money mid-year. If we had a settlement, a tax certiorari settlement or other type of settlement, and if it was for $2 million and we didn't have a reserve, we would either have to borrow the money or send people home. I mean, to come up with. So by establishing these reserves and having the foresight to, anticipate what the liability is to the district, we can offset spikes in the tax levy for those reasons. And again, here are just some of the purposes and uses. They're established by board resolution or voter approval, funded from excess funds at the end of the budget year, or upon Board of Ed resolution. They're targeted towards specific liabilities. Reduce future tax levy increases by appropriating towards the budget. We can use those also to allocate towards the budget if they're not needed, and use them to avoid large tax swings. Reduce the possibility of fiscal stress when they do your fiscal swings. The comptroller's office looks at your fiscal stress. And when you're financing for capital projects, one of the first things they ask you is, do you have reserves? What does your financial picture look like? How are you, fiscally set? And those are all indicators of a financially stable school district.
And they have a direct impact on what interest rate we pay on borrowing.
Two of the reserve funds I just wanted to specifically bring up again were the capital reserve fund. This capital reserve fund is a new capital reserve fund that was voter approved last May. It has a 10-year life, and it's funded by unexpended appropriations up to a $10 million maximum. And so the board at the end of this current 15-16 school year appropriated $3 million to the capital reserve fund. So that the money in the capital reserve fund can be used to offset future costs of future building projects, thus eliminating the need for debt for those projects in the regular general fund budget. So it's essentially a prepaying some of your future debt on those.
And building projects obviously include new things that we might build, such as the high school, or things that we might need to repair that require a large amount of money.
Just to note, as I mentioned, the reserves have different legal parameters around them and specifications, and in order to expend from the capital reserve also requires voter approval. So if you put a building project out, you would specify that the funding would be from the capital reserve, and that's how the voters would approve that. And the other one that we have used, and it's very important to us, and is obviously, if you read today's paper, is critical, is the tax certiorari reserve fund. And the tax certiorari reserve fund, there's a 4-year maximum on the tax certiorari reserve fund. So technically, you're supposed to look at your tax certiorari liabilities, how many petitions you have outstanding on assessment reductions, and 4 years bring the money back. Unfortunately, for our district, we have a list of outstanding tax certiorari petitions. So annually, along with the Audit and Finance Committee, we review the list. We make sure that our tax certiorari reserve is sufficient enough to protect us from any of the liability.
So as many of you know, we anticipate a 7-figure removal from that reserve for a situation out in the old IBM area. And what's it called, Hudson Valley Mall is making noises about a possible action too. So this tax certiorari reserve fund will be tapped. This brings us back to an earlier page, the budget goals. And we put them on here because, of course, they're important, supporting student achievement all the way down to keeping within the tax levy limit and long-range fiscal stability. We put them up here again because we thought we'd close with that, since they're sort of the key to the budget. I think the district's budget, I guess you would say any organization's budget, if you read it, it'll tell you what's important to that organization. And we hope that readers of our budget will be able to ascertain that these are the important things to this district. That's it.
Any questions? Yes. Mrs. Jordan?
If we tap out the tertiary fund because of the problems in the town of Ulster, how would we replenish it? Can you take it from other reserve funds? Or do
We
you
have a list of tax certiorari petitions outstanding on the district at any given time. Typically, they're filed prior to the beginning of the school tax year, so they're filed in July typically. So we look at that list every year. Currently, to cover that liability, we have about 75%. So we feel that we are continually looking at that and have enough that we aren't going to tap it out.
Okay.
Now, to fund that, the reserves are all funded in different ways, and the tax certiorari reserve can be funded through board approval of appropriating fund balance at the end of the year, or the voters could vote on a line item in the budget. So typically, we funded it in the past from unexpended fund balance at the end of the year.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Shaughnessy?
So I just think on that, so that unappropriated fund balance, the 4%, that's available to use in an emergency.
Correct.
We've never had to use it,
Correct.
at least in the time I've been on the board.
Correct.
There are districts that have had to use that fund balance, and it puts them in severe distress, and we've been fortunate not to have to do that.
And again, when the state is analyzing your fiscal stress factors and how fiscally stable you are, that's another thing that they look at, that you have maintained that percent. And several years ago, I don't know how many years ago, it was 2%. And it took a lot for them to get that up to 4%.
So that is our ultimate backstop.
Mr. Shaughnessy, again?
So I'll make two more comments. One, it's a very thorough presentation, and I thank you for the work that went into it. I think it's very understandable and a good way to start our budget process for the next year. And the last comment I'll make is that the checks from the state will probably come like November 3rd or something like that.
Exactly.
A few days before the election.
Exactly.
Well, we handle those.
I'd like to request that we make that available in board libraries so that we can refer to it. Actually, technically, if you checked your annotated calendar, I know we're not really in the habit of doing that every meeting now. We're going to be making revisions to the annotated calendar, so it's really a living document. It's not going to be static. It's going to change. So when we change the budget presentation to this evening, instead of October 5th, because we have two other presentations that evening, it means our preliminary discussion of the budget can start today, board priorities. But I would like you to hold that until the board portion of the agenda, because we still have our owners rep and KSQ and BBL waiting to present as part of the superintendent's report. And it'll give you time to, if you haven't already, formulate questions maybe.